Hey, welcome back. So this is going to be my first impressions of the TD716 from Roland. This is one of their two flagship drum sets. On the one hand, you got the V80-716, which I've already done a really deep dive video on, so go check that out first. And then also this is the TD716, which instead of focusing on acoustic-like shells, this focuses on more classic electronic drum pad style design. That doesn't mean this is any worse though. It's $1,000 cheaper, but it shares some of the same components. The triggering is just as good. It just has a different form factor, and it's using a drum rack instead of individual stands. You can probably already guess, because I liked the VAD-716, when I sat down and played this, I also really liked it. This is also a fantastic experience as well, and I want to talk about it in today's video. But first, today's video is brought to you by Edrum Center. If you're shopping for any electronic drum set from any brand, go give them a shot. They're a great drum store based in Tennessee that just focuses on electronic drums, so they know the products inside and out, they can answer your questions, and I've got a small discount link below. Tell them that Justin sent you. I really appreciate it. Okay, so next up, let's talk about the overall sizing and the components. First up, we've got an 18-inch kick drum. It looks very similar to the kick drum that comes on the TD50 KV2, but it is different because the playing surface, where the sensor is, it is physically larger. And this was a much needed upgrade. I complained about it on the older kits because they really didn't have a ton of room and you had to line up the beaters absolutely perfectly or else they would go off of the pad. Well, now this is a little bit larger and gives you more margin for error. It also gives you the ability to have your beaters a little bit lower. You don't have to be as precise about it on this. The next component is the snare drum. This is the new version of the digital snare. It's 14 inches across. The upgrades over the previous digital snare is that it has positional sensing not only from the edge to the center, but also it can detect positional sensing from right to left as well. They lay it out as a pie grid inside of the module, so it's kind of like 360 degrees of positional sensing, though I don't think they have an official term for it. That's just what I call it. This doesn't really have an effect on the sound. I've tested this in depth and I couldn't really hear a difference if I was playing on the right or left side of the snare drum. What it does though is future-proof Roland in case they want to utilize that feature inside of the module later, or right now it does have a MIDI value. So this means that if you need to change the sound by playing in different parts of the snare inside of Ableton, let's say, you now have that ability because it's sending those MIDI notes. That's really cool. There's a couple of other little things as well, like the rubber rim is not on top of the metal rim anymore. It's right inside that circle. So now it can be a little bit lower, a little bit more true to life. And the rubber itself seems to be possibly slightly different. Also, it has a snare throw off. It's a kind of a 3-in-1 design. You can turn your snare wires on or off. You can also turn this little dial that's built into the snare throw off. And that means you can adjust the tension of the wires, or you can tune your snare up and down in real time. That's really cool, really handy. Also, there's a button built into that, which you can use to do things like start the metronome. So this is not a gimmick. It is actually a legitimate, nice feature. And now, in my opinion, this is the nicest 14-inch electronic snare drum in the industry. This is really good. Now, the tricky question is, if you have an old Roland drum set with the old version of the digital snare drum, which was already fantastic, do you need to upgrade to this new one? And the answer is complicated. If you don't have the V71 module, well, it's not going to take advantage of the capabilities of the new snare drum. So yeah, don't upgrade to the new snare drum. But if you do want to buy the V71 module, you can also buy this new snare drum. It'll give you the capabilities I was talking about, but it's not a must-have necessary upgrade, all right? We're getting to the point where Roland is trying to find ways to make their snare drums, which were already fantastic, just a little bit better here and there. And I feel like they've found enough things to upgrade over their old digital snare drum that they can justify all of this. And that's really cool. But the old digital snare drum was also really good. So you don't necessarily need to upgrade to this new one if you don't feel like it. All right, so the next new components are the 4 new toms. So the high toms are 10 inches across, and the floor toms are 12 inches across. They definitely look different than the pads that came on the TD50 KV2 and the TD30 and all that sort of stuff. They definitely have a different aesthetic, but I like it. They kind of have a, I don't know, how would you describe this? Industrial or something like that. Kind of an edgy look. I like it. It's a mixture of black and chrome and silver. I don't know why I didn't notice this before, but it looks like they have a dual mount design. So there's 2 ways of mounting them. You'll also notice that the rubber rim is similar to how they went with the new rubber rim on the new version of the digital snare drum. So it's not on top of the metal rim naturally that the pad has. It's just inside of it, so it can be a little bit lower. And I believe the rubber is going to be a little bit different as well. The insides of this are also a little bit different, I believe. I don't have a photo on me right now, but if I find one during the editing phase of this video, I'll put it on screen. But anyway, the way Roland talks about it, they call this a high-resolution multi-sensor system that provides independent detection of rim and head hits, hotspot elimination, and positional sensing with the V71 and other modules. Now for the positional sensing feature, that's good to have. It's been a Roland feature since 1999. But the thing is, the tom instruments don't actually have the sound support for that. So if you put a snare drum sound on one of the toms, you'll actually hear tonal, timbre changes when you play from the center to the edge. But the tom instruments don't actually have those sound changing characteristics that the positional sensing offers. Though I do believe I remember reading in the manual that it can do different rim shot detection, and the tom instruments do actually have different samples to support playing a shallow rim shot on the tom versus a open rim shot. So yeah, I like the toms, and I feel like they did a really good job on them. Now let's talk about the cymbals. We got the digital hi-hats. It's a 2-piece 14-inch design, and they're very, very good. They're probably the very best electronic hi-hats in the whole industry. They can do positional sensing from sort of the bell area to the edge. They can detect if you're actually playing from the right and left sides, which the module doesn't really utilize that data, but it's cool to have for MIDI purposes. And it doesn't technically have a bell zone, but there are ways to get a bell zone inside of software. There are ways around it because it can utilize the positional sensing data, but there aren't any sort of bell sounds assigned for that inside of the module itself. So anyway, it's a really, really good hi-hat. I feel like they could eventually upgrade the open and close mechanism a little bit, because as far as I can tell, they haven't really upgraded it from the VH13 era that much. I've opened the 2 hi-hats side by side, and I can't really tell any sort of upgrades from just looking at it. But yeah, these are the very best hi-hats in the electronic drum industry. I like them a lot, and they work great. The next cymbal is the 18-inch digital ride, which, like I've said in other videos, it's also fantastic. It does positional sensing just like the hi-hat, up, down, but now right to left as well. This seems to be a relatively new addition, and it's not because the cymbal itself changed. It seems to be a software update that is now inside the V71 module and also like the TD50X and stuff. It didn't have that before. I was kind of confused to see that pop up. It's kind of cool. It also has the static electricity sensor, so you don't have to mute it just by pinching the edge. It can do that, but you can also just rest your hand on top of it. And the bell, you don't have to hit it like it owes you money. You just, you play it like an acoustic bell, and it's more sensitive than some of their older, ride cymbals. And then finally, we got the 2 16-inch crash cymbals. They're technically 3-zone, so you get bell, bow, and edge, but you need that secondary cable to get the bell zone, and Roland doesn't actually have bell samples for their crashes. So they're effectively, on this drum set, 2-zone for all intents and purposes. I like these cymbals. They're large, they're thin, they got a little bit of flex to them so you can dig in while you're crashing. I like them. So next up is the hardware. So this comes with the MDS Stage drum rack. It is incredibly heavy duty, and it also allows you to position all your cymbals and drums exactly how you want, with the ball mounts for the toms and stuff, and the cymbals with the boom arms and everything. No notes, it's just a very, very solid drum rack. The thing to mention though is that it is incredibly heavy. So if you're going to gig with this drum set and you're thinking, ooh, I'm going to cheat the system by getting this drum set over the TD716, it's going to be so much lighter. The whole drum set is very, very heavy. This drum set comes in at 124 pounds compared to the TD716, which is 153 pounds. So there's definitely a weight difference, but it's more minimal than you might anticipate. Okay, so next up we got the V71 module. I'm going to warn you right here, I'm not going to talk about this as much in depth as I did in my VAD716 video. So go watch that if you want to have more information. Then of course, watch tutorials and stuff if you want every tiny little detail. But here are the broad brush strokes about it that you need to know. So the V71 module has a very similar form factor to the TD50 and TD50X. It's got a very similar port selection, and I talked about the minute differences in my news announcement video when they first talked about this. But it is very much a similar experience. Some of the differences are, you actually get Bluetooth on this finally, which is cool. They sacrifice giving you 2 mix inputs, so you get 1 physical mix input and then a Bluetooth channel now, but that's definitely a trade that I personally really prefer. You get a color screen on it, which is great. You don't have that tiny little sliver of a screen in black and white. There's also a computer program, so you can remotely edit your kits on your computer instead of looking at still the relatively small screen right here. Parts of the drum module are now lit up with LEDs, so you can see it in the dark if you're playing live on stage. And yes, even acoustic drummers are using this live on stage to power different, mesh or rubber pads that they have. So that's a real consideration, and that's actually a nice quality of life thing. The port selection is also solid, multiple direct outs, multiple master outs, and either XLR or balanced 1/4 inch outs, so that's cool. You've got 2 different headphone jacks in different sizes. It does all the right things. I do think that F-Note has a bit of an edge with their stage box on the F-Note Pro module, but for 99% of people, this has literally everything that you need. And one last thing about outputs, it actually can do 32 audio channels over USB, which is really, really good. I don't think any other electronic drum module out there can do that many over USB. When it comes to sound count, they're saying that it's over 1,000, and the number of kits that you get is 70, plus all the empty preset kits on top of that. But of course, the main strength of this module, like all Roland modules, is that they can out-edit any other company into the ground. I feel like there's a myth going around that, Roland uses the CGI equivalent of sound in order to just create sounds out of thin air. That's not actually happening here. They sample real acoustic drums and cymbals, and then they put it through a pipeline that basically gives us the Roland sound. And they also give you the ability to edit them way more than Gava does, way more than F-Note does, way more than Zildjian does. None of the other companies can really touch all of these different adjustments that you can make inside of this module. It's crazy. So next up, sound quality. This is always going to be tricky to talk about because drum tone is purely vibes opinion based, okay? I can tell you on a clinical level that these are very detailed, rich samples. Whether or not you like the way they're processed and the way the preset kits sound will be a personal decision. I like playing this. I feel like Roland did a fantastic job. This is going to be a little bit more processed than like an F-Note or a Zildjian kit that try to be more minimalistic and just like you were there in the room. This is trying to give you the radio sound more often than not. They got plenty of kits for plenty of genres. Roland modules tend to sound better the more you edit them if you know what you're doing. Is it as good? Has it reached sound quality parity with really nice drum plugins like Superior Drummer 3? And that's where I'm going to have to draw the line. I don't think this sounds as good as Superior Drummer 3 or DWE Soundworks, which is funny. We're going to talk more about that in a second. The really nice drum plugins that have all this data and they're recorded in 11.1 or whatever, those plugins are still the gold standard. And if you're recording an album on electronic drums, still, I would recommend using drum plugins. Not to say that you can't use this module, but again, the gold standard is still going to be drum plugins. But that's not to take away from the fact that this module sounds really good. It has a ton of editing options, and it's doing it all inside a box, not using some, computer, in real time. It's doing it inside a box, self-contained, at really, really low levels of latency. If the Roland sound works for you, then fantastic. If you prefer F-Note, or if you prefer Gava or Zildjian or whoever, then go with those companies. And that's the beauty of competition. Okay, so next up we got the Roland Cloud. I'm going to talk about this briefly because it's honestly not a big deal right now, but they push it really hard in their marketing, so I need to cover it. So the Roland Cloud is this program you can download for Windows, Mac, and I believe iOS. The way it works is you go to Hardware Instruments, you go to Drums and Percussion, V71, and now you have a library of drum sets that you can download and transfer over to your module. It's a cool idea. I like it. And these 4 right here are all free. And they're kits from older modules, TD30, TD50, TD50X. That's cool. So there's a way to get extra free sounds from the Roland Cloud. That's great. But they also offer paid kits over here that you can access either by buying them each for $30 or by getting the monthly subscription, which is so expensive it doesn't make any sense for drummers. Like this doesn't make any sense. But hey, if you really fall in love with the Slingerland kit thing, you can buy it for $30. That makes sense to me, though it is maybe a tad expensive. Where these samples come from right here, the ones from DW, they come from Soundworks, which is a plugin that DW has, and it's what powers the DWE, actually. But Roland sort of optimizes them, shrinks them down a little bit, and allows you to get a V71 version that you can run locally inside of your module. So this is not megabyte by megabyte, the exact identical version of their sound plugin counterpart, but it's optimized for the Roland module and can run at that extreme low level of latency and all that sort of stuff. So anyway, Roland Cloud is very tiny right now. I expect in the year 2030, maybe there's going to be multiple pages of options. But right now, I would only buy individual kits that you like and don't do the subscription until maybe down the line if they have so many sounds it's irresistible. But we're not there anywhere close to that quite yet. Okay, so next up, let's talk about price, competition, and who this drum set is for. Now, there's no way around this. It's an expensive kit. $8,000 for an electronic drum set is a big ask. And it's actually $1,000 cheaper than the TD716, which costs $9,000. But still, because it's in that price bracket, if this was a car, it would be the McLaren. It's not a Honda Civic, okay? You don't necessarily need this unless you're in a very narrow, specific sort of situation. For most people that actually will buy this, they're going to buy it because they want the best of the best and they want the McLaren of electronic drums. That's essentially what this is, and there's nothing wrong with that. But that will be a smaller group of people than the people that are spending $2,000 on like TD17 kind of drum sets. The drum set is fantastic at what it does, but it's also incredibly expensive. And it's out of stock at the moment. Right now on Sweetwater.com, this drum set is out of stock, the TD716 is out of stock, and I also noticed that Edrum Center is saying that they're currently sold out as well until they get more inventory. But of course, you can always place an order at any of these websites and they'll ship it to you whenever they get stock, just so you know. Now, when it comes to competition, there's really not much to say. Usually I can give you a few different options around the same price and say, hey, this is what this does better and this is what that does worse. But as far as like pad-based $8,000 flagship level electronic drums, there's really not that much out there, if any. So if we take a look at Gava, their prices have gone way down and they don't really have a new version of the G9 that I would say is a true competitor against the V71 module. So they don't really have a true competitor to this kit. Neither does Pearl, neither does Yamaha. They'd have to come out with a Yamaha DTX 20 or 30 before I would say they have a true competitor. And then if we take a look at like Alesis, they're not built out to, compete at that pricing level either. The Strata Prime is cool in many ways, but it's not really a true competitor against this kit. Really, nobody has something that is truly a good second option against this kit if you want the bleeding edge best of the best where every single feature possible is packed in to a pad-based electronic drum set. Now, this might be cheating, but there is one drum set I would consider against this kit if you're seriously thinking about buying it, and that is the TD713. So it is significantly cheaper. It's in the $6,000-ish price range. It has the new flagship module. It has the new version of the digital snare, has the hi-hats, the ride. It just sacrifices going down to the PDX 100 tom pads, which I actually have. I like those tom pads. They're very good. They just don't look as cool, basically. And they're a little bit smaller on the floor tom side. It's got the smaller kick drum, which is still a good kick drum, but it's not as cool as the 18-inch kick drum that comes on the TD716. So it's making moves like that to bring down the price, but still retaining the core elements of the flagship experience. So you can consider that as an alternative to the TD716 for a lot less money if you want to buy it. Okay, so that's all I got. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.